Hello, and welcome to a very special bonus episode of the Play It Forward podcast, presented by PeacePlayers, the podcast where we lift up voices and stories of people working in their communities and networks to promote peace and equity through sport. My name is Shanina Wagwa, and I am your host, and I am beaming with joy on this very special episode, as I mentioned. Today's show will highlight the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his fight for equality, equity, justice, and peace. And I know this is going to be an amazing conversation, so I'm going to leave it there, but I can't go any further without introducing the most amazing co-host in the entire world, Mlk Quote.
Oh, woo! Guys, okay, calm down. I'm just a normal person like the rest of you. Chinny, how are you? I miss you.
I know, I miss you too. I'm doing so well.
I have my coffee. I'm excited. I'm awake, but I have the coffee just because I'm ready to listen and educate myself today, because we have, like you said, a plethora of amazing people on today's episode. And it's a bonus episode. So why don't you tell the people who we're talking to today?
Yes. And so because we have such amazing guests on the show today, I'm going to read from my paper because I don't want to miss out on anything. So bear with me as I have this really beautifully scripted intro to these amazing guests. All right. So Emmett, thank you so much. For our listeners, one of the PeacePlayers United States' biggest annual events takes place during Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day weekend, where each of our community partners work together with us to host and plan an event that lifts up and celebrates the work of Dr. King. Unfortunately, we had to postpone our in-person celebrations due to the pandemic. I mean, you guys all know what we're dealing with right now. This was hard for us to do, as many of our young and older listeners and PeacePlayers really enjoy celebrating that weekend to reinforce our commitment to Dr. King's message, work, and legacy. This special podcast is our attempt to incorporate what we often do in person during the MLK Day celebration to discuss the interconnectedness of sport, social justice, and civil rights. This group that we've convened today, includes individuals who are inspired by those who paved the way, but are also trailblazing their own way. Round of applause for that. All right, let's get into the guests. Our first guest to highlight is Renata Simrall, who is leading LA84, which is at the forefront of driving equity and sports-based youth development in Los Angeles and leading research to support the importance of these efforts. Please help me welcome Renata Simrall. Woo, woo. All right. Our next guest is a Harvard Law School graduate, retired NBA player, and outspoken voice for long-term efforts to create equity and impact. Please help me welcome back our returning guest, Len Elmore. In Len's first appearance, he spoke to the power of athletes, that athletes have to use their platform to do more than the performative acts of activism. So we thought, it only is right to bring him back to this show and have an amazing show today. And our final guest, give it up for our final guest. I'm excited about this guest, is someone who's extremely special. He is heavily involved in the Teach for America, recently served as the executive director of Democracy Prep at Agassi campus in Las Vegas. I had to get that right. And is, as of January 1st, PeacePlayers United States executive director. Please help me welcome Mr. Adam Johnson. This is amazing. Thank you guys for coming. And so you can imagine that we brought all of you guys together because you have the most amazing voices. And we love to hear about your experiences, your efforts and works and challenges, and hear about the hopes that transformative power can create and the collaborative efforts that it brings and what we can achieve when we unite and come together. I've said enough. And
that's our show. So thank you guys for coming. We appreciate your time and effort. Chinny, that was great.
Thank you so much. I'm done. Yep.
Hi, everyone. How is everyone?
Yes. How are you all?
Still here.
Awesome. Right.
Len's like, I'm still breathing. So
yeah, we're COVID good. We're COVID
Yeah.
good.
Right.
So before we sort of dive into this Jada Pinkett Smith roundtable discussion, if you will, I wanted to start with an Mlk quote that sort of spoke to me, but I want to hear how it spoke to you guys in different ways. And so we'll just go around and sort of give me your thoughts on what this quote means to you personally. If America does not respond creatively to the challenge to banish racism, Some future historian will have to say that a great civilization died because it lacked the soul and commitment to make justice a reality for all men and women. And Adam, let's start with you. What does that quote mean to you specifically?
Number one, thank you all for letting me join. I'm a part of this wonderful group, and I'm really humbled to be here. And I grew up in a home where social justice, civil rights, and sports were all focal points for my family and me. And so when I think about what this quote means, I think it means that, just at least to me, it means that America, we need to reflect on whether we're willing to be uncomfortable, we're willing to sacrifice, and we're willing to collaborate in ways that are necessary to ensure that equal access to opportunities exist.
Absolutely.
And it also means, though, that because we know not all people are willing to sacrifice at the same levels, and that we have to have special people who can persuade and inspire those who are less willing to be able to help them make that sacrifice so we can usher in the change that's necessary to expeditiously move us in the right direction, because it's necessary and because, all people deserve equal access to all opportunities.
Right.
If that's the first answer, that was awesome.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Renata, what about you? What does this quote mean to you?
Yeah, I reflected on the line, the soul and commitment to make justice a reality for all men and women.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about I was raised in a Jesuit tradition. When you think about the soul, that's the moral and emotional. So really, I think Martin Luther King, as I've studied him, this was a moral obligation for us to see each other as humans and to come together in our shared humanity. And I think that quote tells me that until we're able to feel kindness and sympathy toward others and to see our shared humanity, our civilization is going to crumble. I mean, I think we can see that, in sort of the divided nature that we have in this country currently. The last thing I'll say is I think we really have to all be diligent allies to fight against racism. And I think that doesn't just that doesn't mean whites being allies, but I think it's also African Americans, it's Asians, looking at and being able to share a perspective. I grew up in a community just south of LA, city of Carson, and I was doing this interview and kind of looking through some photos that they wanted, and we had this multicultural community. We had Samoans, we had Latinos, we had Asians of every shape and size. Mm-hmm. And my play aunts were Mexican, from Mexico, and there was really a shared sense of what binds us versus what divides us. And I think Martin Luther King's fight for justice was to see our humanity in one another and have empathy and to be able to share kindness. So I think if we can do a little bit of that, we'll be on the right track. But that's a hard road to toe, I think, as Adam.
Oh, it is true. It is true.
Absolutely.
That sort of first domino is seeing the humanity in others, and at PeacePlayers, that core value of seeing people as people. It's just building those blocks to be able to build more empathy and self-awareness for people in the world. Yeah, and kindness, exactly. And Len, let's finish with you. What does this quote mean to you?
Well, notwithstanding the wonderful things that preceded what I'm about to say, and the wonderful things that Renata and Adam have said, I hear that and think of, again, I think of America as that great experiment. When you take a look at the rest of the world, I mean, we are unique. But remember, that experiment started without including enough people, not including a number of people, but we've been able to transcend that and the struggles that it took to get there. I think obviously well worth it. And what the statement made by Dr. King says is that, we will have wasted all of that effort and the struggle and the lives that, have been lost and all of the other things that have been changed through sacrifice, if we don't commit ourselves. He talks about in his philosophy, the three evils, poverty, racism, and even militarism. Mm-hmm. And, if we don't address those three things, and we don't have the will and the commitment to do that, to make this experiment work, then, obviously it will have been a wasted effort, and those who have sacrificed will have sacrificed in vain. And do we want to be that part of that generation, that part of history that essentially has failed that experiment.
Right.
So that's something that we all have to take to heart. And, so I wanted to broaden that and recognize that it is up to us as individuals, up to us as a collective, those of us who have the will. Because remember, within this great experiment, there are others who are working against it. And so we've got to countenance, their efforts against it and redouble our efforts for it.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, yeah, that was an amazing start to the show. I told you guys I was going to have goosebumps, but so we made the responses were a bit just general. So I want to bring it on home because there were amazing responses, and I want to dive into how you all uplift Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy in your everyday lives. And so that being said, and as Emmett mentioned, we're kind of going to point the questions, but they're open for everyone after you've spoken. So Renata, I'm going to start with you. Which elements of Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy do you recall and try to integrate into your work?
I'd say his, let me just say this, Len, your comments made me think about, I was a political science major in college, and, I resonate on the formation of this country and a line toward a more perfect union. And I think we forget about that, is that democracy is not a spectator sport. It actually, you've got to be in the game and working toward that more perfect union. And I'd say that is the element of Martin Luther King's legacy that I really strive for. It's every day, it's work. It's every day, for yourself, being the best you can be, bringing out your kindness and your humanity. I think it's working with your family, it's working with your community, and then your larger society. But it's an everyday struggle to make yourselves and your community better, particularly given Len's point about the forces that are fighting against that more perfect union. And the lack of inclusion and the lack of humanity, first and foremost for, Black people. We were 3/5. We were treated as, and still are in large measure, as property. And until that, changes, I think we're going to continue to be on the struggle toward that more perfect union. So I think that is what I do. I show up every day, ready to be in the battle. For a long time in my career, I was, playing the outside game, and now I'm transitioning to be an executive, and, it's an inside game to try to move forward, particularly through, sport and sport team to bring that more perfect union to fruition.
Right. Adam, Len, jump right in.
So much of what both of you, Len and Renata, have said has resonated with me. Just, I really appreciate the opportunity to even be in this dialogue, namely because a lot of the first step in making sure that we're able to help folks understand how they can help is by having these open, honest conversations where people can listen and have really candid opinions. And one of the things that, for me, that when I think about Dr. King's legacy and how he was able to make so much change is his ability to have an incredibly clear vision for what he wanted to accomplish, but then was able to articulate that in a way that was so precise and so simple to be able to be made come to fruition, and thinking about what he was asking for, right? Of course, it was civil rights overall, but then specifically he wanted, in 1964 to make sure that the Voting Rights Act passed, right? It was a very specific thing, right? That he could build a large coalition around and help large groups of people really understand the plight, understand what their role could be, and then could mobilize towards the thing. And so when I think about the work that I have to do, whether it was at our school in the previous 5 years or working at Teach for America now here with PeacePlayers, it is making sure that my vision is incredibly clear so that I know exactly where I'm going to go, where I would like all of our teammates to go. And then how can I bring in as many people as possible to help make that come to fruition, but then also give them very specific tasks so that they feel invested, they feel connected, they feel like the task although arduous, is manageable and doable. And so that to me is where I feel like I do a lot of my work, which is, working every day to restate that mission, to make sure folks are invested, going to different people and saying saying the message in a different ways so that it resonates with them, and then giving them a part of the work so that they can help move us along. Because we only get to the place that we talked about where we are successful in this experiment of America when we are all pointed in the right direction. And that means that every single person has to understand how they can help us get there.
Absolutely.
That's great stuff. And listening to what Adam said just reminded me, you talk about the clarity of Dr. King's vision. Even in his first book, The Stride Towards Freedom, he puts down those 6 principles of nonviolence. And, at that point in time, even though obviously he borrowed from Gandhi's principles of nonviolence and applied them to the experience here in the United States. That type of clarity of thinking is unrivaled in my opinion. And what Renata said about being in the game and getting it done by being on the inside, I think is extremely important. And so when you look at those principles of nonviolence, it was principle 6, I think, that really I kind of use. It keeps me buoyed, if you will, keeps my head above water, even at times when, I think that, we're all sinking. And that principle 6 is essentially believing that the universe is on the side of justice. Remember, Dr. King said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And really, that's what it comes down to, faith that justice will eventually prevail. And what that does, it energizes activism. Even in points and times when we look at it and think, that we're up against it. I really had that feeling flowing through my veins on January 6th when you saw the forces of evil. Absolutely. But you still have to believe that the moral universe ultimately will bend towards justice. And, as a lawyer, from a legal standpoint, you hope that justice is coming for those who, essentially attack the moral fiber of this country. But more than anything else, like I said, it energizes the activism. It keeps you going. And it really allows, we say keep the faith. It allows the faith to be kept.
Absolutely.
And if you're a believer in a higher power or deity, you have to believe that higher power is a higher power for justice.
Absolutely.
And so that's what keeps you going. And that's what I got, and that's what I try to apply every day.
I love it. And it's that faith that keeps us going. But what I want to do is kind of tie us all here together, because we've all been incorporated and been a part of or uplifted or contributed to sport in a dynamic way. And so my question is, in what ways can sport be a tool for furthering the fight for equity? And have you seen sport effectively challenge unjust radical dynamics? And Len, I remember you were on the show last time when we spoke a bit about this, but and so I guess I'll start with you, Len, in terms of that question.
Well, look, sport is tightly woven in our mosaic of culture in the United States, in that fabric, and so that gives sport itself and those who participate, it gives them a platform of influence that's almost unrivaled in many ways. And so can it have an impact on what we do? It absolutely can, because it has in the past. I mean, historically, we can take a look at so many different athletes in ways that they've used their sport and their platforms. We can go all the way back to those who tried to fight against separate but equal, and had opportunities foreclosed upon them. Athletes like jockeys and boxers, the Jack Johnsons of the world. And then you look at how Joe Louis and Jesse Owens were used by this country to kind of promote democracy, et cetera, but yet still the hypocrisy of them not being able to enjoy that. But nevertheless, they stood for it, and they started to change people's minds. And then with the integration of baseball itself in 1947, no one can tell me that that didn't have influence on the ultimate
Right.
Brown versus Board of Education,
Yeah.
which ended segregation, at least from a legal standpoint. And then you look at Ali and what he was able to do
Right.
with his boxing, and then you move up to others. Even so, to this day, we have people who are standing for it, changing minds in many ways. You look at Colin Kaepernick and others. That's where sport plays a particular role. But can we go forward? Is there more to be done? Because
Right.
that platform has power and that platform has leverage. It's going to take a particular kind of courage to be able to exercise, that leverage. And I'm not sure we're there yet.
Right.
Can I jump in here?
Yes,
Because
please.
I'm really resonating, Len, on what you're saying. And I like to say that, through the arc of time, social issues, sports is where social issues go to get attention. You mentioned the integration of baseball. I'm actually doing some research and, on sport and social justice. And I didn't realize that in 1884, Moses Fleet Walker was the first African-American Major League Baseball player. And 3 years later, the Major League Baseball instituted the rule against Black players. So, there was a time before, right? There's a time before, Jackie Robinson and baseball being integrated, that we were free to play. But, again, here rules by those in power, you're preventing us from that more perfect union, if you will, and being able to see the humanity and being able to express ourselves as best we can. So I think that through the arc of sport, major sporting events, as Len talked about, social justice issues do go to get attention there. But I actually have seen a change, and I see the change, starting with Colin Kaepernick, because historically, if you look at, Jesse Owens, if you look at John Carlos and Tommy Smith, their careers were over. They were a pariah, kicked out. They couldn't, find a living. They had to struggle. And I think Colin, even if you look at, Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley, it wasn't apropos to use your platform because you would be penalized. It was punitive. And so there was a different approach to social justice and using your platform during that time. It was, I'm going to get mine and I'm going to try to hold on to mine. Right. And Colin Kaepernick, to me, looking at that arc, was a defining moment when Nike stood with him and, made their whole campaign against them. And then if you sort of look at the trajectory of the timeline post Colin Kaepernick, brands started to see, wow, our consumers changing, our fan base is changing. They're demanding more authenticity. They're demanding, that we stand up for justice. And I think I've definitely seen that, as a result of the death of George Floyd and how corporations have, leaned in and made these statements and, putting dollars in. I'm starting to see that wane a little bit. So when we get back to, how do we, uphold the quote that you read, Adam, and from Martin Luther King, is like, you've got to stay in the fight and get up every day. But I think that there is more of an openness to athletes using their platform and not being, penalized or not being punitive. Because I think that we are in this sort of transition period where the fan base is changing. You've got, more folks that are leaning into social justice. Edelman did a trust barometer, that said that their businesses and nonprofit organizations is what people trust these days. And I think sport is also that, sort of, if you will, that more perfect union. I was at the Rams games on Sunday, hence my raspy voice. And, where else but sport? This community come together, no matter what you look like, no matter your economic, your circumstance, black, white, gay, trans, you're rooting for your one team and coming together in shared humanity for a single common purpose of winning that game. And I think it's interesting how social justice issues go into that space, because I think that is what we're ultimately trying to have outside of the stadium, off the field. But sport, I think, has the tremendous opportunity to continue to hold people accountable, to show up every day and do the work.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And I just quickly add, I know we've got a couple of other things we want to discuss, but two things I wanted to mention that Len and both Renata touched on is, number one, with sport, you have the opportunity to change perception really quickly, as it relates to, oftentimes social justice issues are built because there's a lack of understanding of the other side. So a group of people don't have the opportunity to understand what another group of people have experienced or are going through. And so they are building their perception of another group based on what's been told to them. And so when you see those barriers broken down in sports, you think about when Texas Western was able to beat Kentucky for a national championship, the perception that 5 Black basketball players could start and then win, right? It just, people's perception had to change immediately because they saw with their eyes, and then it had to dismantle some of what they had been learning, right? And it didn't happen quickly, and it's not all the way done, but you have to take first steps in order to take next steps. Right. And then I think the other thing that I mentioned, is when we think about the ways that the trajectory of athletes using their platform now has really accelerated, it's really incredible. To think about what Colin Kaepernick did, just I think it was 5 to 7 years ago, and to now think about just 2 years ago, the Milwaukee Bucks absolutely saying we're not going to play a basketball game because there's injustice in our community. That would not have happened prior to what Renata mentioned. When athletes used their platform and it was punitive, they used their platform and said, we understand our power. Right. We're going to leverage this opportunity to bring attention to a social issue. And now they've been able to continue to give other athletes and other people in the world of sports the courage to do that. I think I'll just even look at what Brian Flores is doing. He's making the ultimate sacrifice. Now I don't know any of the details of the lawsuit that's going on, and that's not to me to determine. Regardless of that, he's made a sacrifice to bring attention to the issue that there's one Black head coach in football. I don't know how many Black GMs there are, and I know there are no Black owners. And so he's bringing this issue to attention. He's sacrificing his own career. Yes. And it wouldn't have been the same in the past. And so I think we're accelerating to a place where people are willing to use their today's capital to make the changes that are necessary. And it's really great to see because we need it.
And let me add, and I don't want to commandeer the dialogue, but as you know, I teach at Columbia University in the sports management department, and that is a class that I teach, athlete activism for social justice. So you're kind of in my wheelhouse. I hear what's being said, and Adam, you brought up one of the most significant points that I bring up in class, that activism requires sacrifice. And the people that you spoke of, whether it's Ali, whether it's Tommy Smith and John Carlos, even Colin Kaepernick, those are sacrifices that have been made. And today, we talk about the support that Nike has given Colin Kaepernick, which, helps an awful lot. But nevertheless, people jump on the bandwagon for it because athletes have stepped up to the line of propriety. Now it requires more. It requires a step over that line. And so that's why I think that we have to start to rethink what athletes are doing today. Everybody steps up to this line now. You talk about the Milwaukee Bucks, and they took that one game and said, we're not going to play. Well, if you, and then what followed was MLS, MLB, some of the others who said, we're not going to play either for that one day. But can you imagine if they decided that we're not going to play, owners, until you guys utilize essentially the same lobbyists that you get your tax breaks and you get breaks from, from the wills and trusts that allow you to pass on the value to your families, et cetera. Those same lobbyists now employ them to do things like change qualified immunity and do other things for criminal justice reform, get them to go to Congress to do that. And if you don't, we're not playing. And, that's a sacrifice to be made. Right. But if they don't play, obviously owners don't get paid. The networks don't get paid. Those are collective things that probably could be done. And I'm not saying they should, because I know when I played in the 70s, there weren't, we were in the kumbaya period where in the glow of post-Civil Rights Act, et cetera, there wasn't an agenda. Right. But the agenda coming in the 90s and up to today is now start. So, we have gone up to the line. The question is, are athletes going to step over that line now in a collective sense? Because I talk about leverage and power. That's what they have to do it.
Right.
But Len, if I could really quickly, it's like you just resonated to me. It's like as I'm looking at this project that I'm working on, and there was this lull from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and as we look back at it, it was sort of this color blindness approach. Even when Ronald Reagan instituted MLK Day, he didn't do it. He sort of usurped Martin Luther King's legacy in this context of color blindness, and that's not what Martin Luther King was advocating for. He was like, I want you to see me as a Black man. I want you to see my humanity. I want you to have empathy and kindness and sympathy toward me and my ability and my right to be equal and free, under this, guise of this Constitution toward a more perfect union and the civil rights, laws that we passed. And I think that is what athletes are trying to do now. And I agree with you. I see them having more power of holding the ownership accountable. But again, I think we all have to put in the work for it to work. It just can't be left to the athletes. We all have to show up and be allies toward social justice if we're going to see our humanity survive.
But they can lead, and that's the thing. We can support and follow, but they can lead. And Adam, you brought up Brian Flores, and that is a perfect example of somebody now stepping over the line, because his career essentially is over. The same thing that happened to Colin Kaepernick. Brian Flores probably will never get a job in the NFL again. But he has taken that step, and from a leadership standpoint, I think people are taking notice and ultimately will support and follow.
Len, I just want to quickly touch in what you talked about, and when you came on the show a couple months ago, it was that performative activist piece, and sort of is it entirely fear-based where performance activism comes, or are there other contributing factors that you see in terms of why that particular activism happens?
Right.
Well, I wouldn't talk about it in fear as in, relating it to cowardice. I think, yes, there is a fear that, maybe if I go out on my own, I'm going to lose everything and nothing gets accomplished.
Right.
I think there's maybe a lack of trust in working as a collective, that if, one player, let's use the NBA, if one or two players from the NBA step out and really want to step over that line, that the rest of them won't follow, because that's where the power is. The power and the leverage is not in the individual, it's in the collective.
Right.
So from that standpoint, that's where it has to be done. How many of you are familiar with the summit that Jim Brown convened during Ali's boycott? Well, actually, not boycott, Ali's punishment for not accepting his draft status and saying he's a conscientious objector. I think another summit needs to be convened, and that players, athletes from all sports, and quite honestly of all races, who are right thinking, can convene and develop that trust and understanding in each other, that they do have a certain amount of leverage. And I'm not advocating that they just go on strike and stop playing sports, but I am advocating that there are other ways now to touch pressure points that are going to, that are going to result in some action. Like John Lewis said, they can get in some good trouble if in fact they do it in the collective.
All of you have said that sports has there's a certain type of power you can leverage as an athlete, and so I'm going to bring this home for our younger listeners, and how sports can create these amazing and exciting platforms, but yet there are still barriers that you cannot penetrate. That barriers that exist because of the color of your skin, your gender, and so my question is, when we hear the word barriers used a lot to explain equitable and equal opportunities, what are some, Len, for example, what are some of the barriers that you've experienced throughout your career, and what barriers are you still experiencing today? And how are you using your platform to address those specific barriers? And these are for our young kids, so break it down so they can understand what that means.
Well, one of the biggest barriers, obviously, notwithstanding skin color and the tropes that accompany, the fact that you're Black, is also being an athlete. And, the idea that athletes aren't smart, that athletes, don't have the wherewithal to formulate concepts and
Right.
to be able to be an advocate. And that's something that I've fought against, my whole life. And I even do it now in academia, where, sometimes you wonder if people are respecting essentially your research, respecting the things that you state, and your accomplishments.
Right.
As an individual who has done a few things, I'm the first and right now the only NBA player that's gotten a Harvard law degree and done some things. Well, I'm saying it because all of a sudden now I'm a product of affirmative action. I mean, we've seen that now with notwithstanding the fact that I did really well on my LSATs, and Harvard looks for people with varied backgrounds, with a commitment to doing things in the public interest, which I expressed and which I affected after I graduated. So that's one of the biggest things, to be able to overcome that particular obstacle. Obviously there probably are other things but I don't necessarily notice them.
Yes.
But the one thing about questioning, my intellect and capacity is something that, I've always had to fight, simply because of what I've done in the past.
Absolutely. And Adam, I kind of want to tie into what you said. You sometimes people's perspectives are forced to change, right? But sometimes not. They just find a different way to figure out why you don't deserve what you've earned. But Renata, I want to point it to you. There are clear barriers that Len will experience that you do not. But then there are clear barriers that Len will experience that will not experience, and you will. And so you being a woman of color, I'd like to speak on or for you to share some of those barriers that you encounter and are dealing with in your everyday life.
Yeah, it's being married to a Black man. We talk about this a lot, particularly over the last couple of years with the murder of George Floyd. There is a difference. Women don't clutch their purse when I walk in an elevator, but my intellectual ability is questioned. How are you in the room? How did you get here? Did you earn it? And as Len was talking, it made me think about, to the younger kids, back to my beginning. Both my parents didn't go to college. They were working class in the grocery, industry. And, we struggled. I mean, it'd be analogous to poverty, today. And, it took me, sort of bold, courageous leadership in sport. I mean, when you think about the power of sport, not to become a professional athlete, but to teach you that resiliency, that grit. I think the connection between hard work and success, and knowing if you put the work in and you stay true to it, that there is, trust that you can get through your circumstances. And certainly that that was a true statement for me, going through the military, to find my way to college, both in terms of being ready, intellectual, but also in terms of being able to afford it. So, I affectionately say that my Uncle Sam, helped me pay for college, and that was a game changer for me. So yes, the same barriers that Len faces, and then some difference being a woman, I get a twofer. But I'd say to the audience is, this word of fearlessness, I think fearlessness is not about being scared, but it's about continuing to move forward despite the fear. So fearing less and understanding that you've got to trust in your ability. And you're going to face people, as I did, that don't like me because I'm a woman, that don't like me because I'm Black, that don't think that I've earned a seat at the table. But you just keep it moving forward and know that on the other side of it, my husband refers to me as a force of nature, because I'm not going to be denied an opportunity.
Better not.
I have talent just like everybody else, and I'm gonna earn my right to have a seat at the table. And I think the other important point about fearlessness and bold and courageous leadership is once you get there, and I think this is in the context of athletes too, in terms of stepping at that line, is that we cannot be, once we get there, once we get in the room, we can't be afraid of opening the door for other people to come behind us. And I think that's the sacrifice, Len, that you talk about with the athletes, is we have to be willing to sacrifice our position to make an open door for others to walk through.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can I just add really quickly, in both Renata and Len use such eloquent statements around about what the barriers are. And, I think it's for young people today, I think one of the things that we have to make sure that they understand is they have different barriers than we did, because we've been able to kind of move forward. But I think what they need to also understand is how to seek out the help, because more now than ever, people want to be able to help young people. Right. They want to see folks flourish and thrive. And so I really do continue to push young people to advocate for themselves. I consistently push young folks to be, I guess, not necessarily aggressive, but like they have to be willing to make outreach to people who they see in spaces where they want to be. I was in Detroit over the weekend, and we were talking about mentors, and we had some young people kind of design what their mentors would be. And I had to tell each and every one of them, if you see a person in a space that you want to be in, you have to be willing to go ask them if they'd be willing to help support you to get to that space. Right. Because 9 times out of 10, the person wants to help. The person wants to be able to bring someone along. And so the barriers exist for sure. Some of the same barriers around thinking that athletes or women or people of color have less intelligence or have less skill. Those still exist, unfortunately. Yeah. But there are more people in positions of power and authority to be able to help bring you along. And so you have to be willing to make that ask and understand where you want to go, so that you can then ask folks to be able to help you get to that place. And then, as Renata said, you be willing to then throw their rope back and bring on 3 or 4 others so that we all can move forward.
Absolutely.
If I can ask, I'd say one of the barriers, Adam, you just brought to my mind, one of the barriers for the younger generation is what I call or define as this culture of convenience.
Right.
Is that, with the era of technology, I'd even say the era of a lot of my oldest son growing up, where everybody got a trophy. I think that the world is now a convenience for them. They get spoon-fed their news. They get spoon-fed their data. Everything is instantaneous. It's like it's the the Burger King generation. You can have it your way. And I think that is a big barrier, black, white, or otherwise, that you have to, and I think sport is the anchor to this, right? You can't just show up on the basketball court and be a GOAT. You got to put in the work. You can't show up on the pitch and expect to start. You've got to put in the work. I think that is, to the younger generation, is you've got to get outside your comfort zone, and you can't be burdened by this culture of convenience if you're going to see a path to success and leadership in your life.
100%.
Agreed. And sort of have a willingness to fail, also fail again, fail better. Sort of that Samuel Beckett quote in a lot of ways. I just loved Renata, early on, you were talking about you have to be a diligent ally, not just white and black people, or white people being diligent allies to black people, but also, African Americans being diligent allies to African Americans. Right. We might have a little bit of time. If you just want to expand on that a little bit more, because that was such a hard hitting point. Oh, also, Chinny, go ahead.
I want to link it to what you also said, Renata, about opening the door. Once you get into the room, to open the door to make sure that there are people coming in behind you. And I want to just say that we've also have to dismantle, get rid of, unload the fear of thinking, I don't know if you guys have heard of the concept crabs in the barrel. I'm the only black person that can be in this position. And so 100%. Therefore, if I open the door, that means my door is closing, and I'm putting myself in position to. So I just want to kind of tie that into what Emmett said, and then I'm going to drop the mic right there and let you do your thing with that.
Yeah, I think it's, I just 2 years ago, I got on my first corporate board. And, when I'm going through the interview process, and, it's SEC rulings and, 10Ks and 8Ks and EBITDA and, cash flow and, so I worked in real estate, I have that background, but there is a notion that we don't show up that way, right? I think the media still perpetuates black people in certain roles. And what I say about that, Emmett, about us leaving our preconceived notion and being diligent allies, is as I was going through the interview process with the CEO, the questions that were coming at were kind of offensive to me, to be quite honest. And, so I had to check myself for a moment. Are they saying that because I'm black, because I'm a woman, that they don't, value my intelligence? And, being a diligent ally means not just letting it go and sitting with those preconceptions and judging the person across from me. So what do you mean by that? And, it was a little bit of, you're in philanthropy. You didn't realize you had, that knowledge and expertise. And so we were able to engage a conversation. So I think that's what that means to my mind about being a diligent ally as a Black woman, is I could have sat with that and, been prejudiced against him, if you were to the word, that he made me different because I was a Black woman, as opposed to engaging and being intellectually curious. We were able to find common bond, around that topic. I think that's what I mean in terms of our responsibility, Black people, not Jesus and end racism. That's not our thing. But certainly to do. So let me just go back. It's like in terms of opening the door when you have a seat at the table, I think it's that sacrifice of knowing that when you have an opportunity as a people in, is that, I used my good friend Nicole Whiteman at the Dodgers when I was there, and we were looking for an executive director of the foundation. I was fearless to say, no, we're going to make sure we have candidates who look like the communities that we serve.
Absolutely.
We're going to sacrifice, the skill set and, a badass person. You got to be, well, we can't find them. I said, then go find them. And, but so that's one piece, is opening that door and being intentional. But the second piece is making sure that you celebrate that.
Yes.
That that we say, wow, this is how Black women are helping Black women in this, in this perspective, and not being afraid to say, Renata opened the door for me. In the same way that I say, Carolyn Webb didn't see us open the door for me, or, insert, the number of mentors that I've had. I think we have to celebrate that. But then the third thing I'll say is, once that door is open, you got to show up and do the work.
Absolutely.
You can't get lulled by this false sense of privilege that we made it in and that we can kind of fall back and just do regular work. We got to be in and still excel, so that it's changing the narrative and the perception. Black folks show up to work. We're good. We got talent. We just need the opportunity to demonstrate that talent, and we need to make sure that we keep the doors open for one another.
Absolutely. And even as a Black person, you're required to have more talent than your counterpart. So yes, absolutely. I'm so happy we're able to get that last piece in. Thank God. Emmett, all yours. That was a great question. Thank you, Renata. That was awesome.
Thank you. I was just so upset that we were missing these little tidbits of absolute drop the mic knowledge moments. It was so perfect. Yes. I think it's time to wrap it up. But Len, Adam, Renata, if there's anything you want to sort of have the listeners remember today, any sort of drop the mic moment that you want to give to our listeners, I would say now is the time. We have a lot of drop the mic esque guests today, so feel free to try to one up each other, and me and Chinny will react accordingly. But I'll leave the floor to you guys.
I'm going to go first, because I know the other two will have much more poignant things to say, and I don't want to have to try to follow the two. Right. Just really quickly, tying up a couple of things. Number one, I finished rereading Nathan McCall's book, which he wrote in 1995, but just makes me want to holler. It was his first book, and I just finished rereading it. And one of the things I took from it was his message about having a level of confidence and resilience, and the ability to really dig within yourself to know that you can do what you want. And so both Renata and Len talked about, how we need to make sure that we show up and we do the work and that we get support, but you also have to have a level of confidence to be able to do that. And so when thinking about, clarity of vision, we bring it back to the top, we talk about Dr. King and having clarity of vision, having the will to do the work, having, inspiring folks to work beside you, to be able to get to your mission. It really is important that you believe that that's going to come to fruition. You have to have an unwavering belief that you're going to be able to make the difference.
100%.
And it will be hard. There will be challenges. You will inevitably find barriers that you didn't expect. But when you firmly believe that what you are working towards is just and true, you can make that difference. So I would
Absolutely.
really stress to young people, older folks, right, regardless of where you are on your journey, got to dig deep. You got to have that self-confidence and self-belief and know that the mission that you are working towards will be able to be accomplished through the work that you put in.
Yes, Adam. And make sure you're surrounding yourself with people who are doing like-minded work so they can lift you up and pour into you.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Len, bring us all home.
Yes.
Well, I think Adam brings up a great point with regard to confidence, confidence in getting yourself involved and in the mix. But, in order to have that confidence, it's just like when as a player, my confidence was greatest when I know that I put in the work in the gym,
Right.
where I was able to refine and practice my skills. It's not practice makes perfect. It's kind of perfect practice makes perfect.
Right.
So what that comes down to is, when you're getting yourself involved in issues, et cetera, one, get the information and understand the issue.
Right.
Have the ability to articulate what the problem is and certainly what the solutions are. All too often I hear athletes, particularly pro athletes, very visible pro athletes, talking about subjects they know absolutely nothing about. And they come off sounding silly and they become vulnerable. The other thing is know the information and the issue well enough where you can educate others.
Yes.
And I think that that's extremely important because now you gain the respect of those who are listening and those who want to be able to follow. Mm-hmm. And then that's how you build that confidence. And it allows you to really form that personal commitment. And really, it also allows you to take the actions that you necessarily have to because you can justify them and you can defend them. So, the confidence is extraordinarily important. But in order to gain that confidence, there are skills that you have to perfect, refine, and ultimately you have to pursue.
Absolutely.
Can I add
Yes,
one closing thought? It reverts back to the work that PeacePlayers does and the sport-based youth development ecosystem does, and that construct of becoming your best self through sport, the transformational power of sport. So I'd simply say to the audience is live like you play.
Drop mic moment right there. Amazing. That's it. Thank you all so much for being on the show and giving us your time.
Seriously.
Phenomenal. Yes. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you Emmett, plugs.
No, that was nothing short of enlightening. And this is exactly why I love what I do, which is just getting to masters of their craft and hearing it from them. And it's just a pleasure to be in the same room with all of you. Seriously, it really is. Virtual room. Virtual room. Yeah, that's it. I got nothing else.
And so if you guys have any plugs or is there places where people can follow you and keep in touch with you or just
at Renata Angelino, hit me up.
Hit that follow.
I'm definitely going to follow. But yes, thank you so very much. We appreciate you. We appreciate your time. This is a phenomenal show. And that's it for today's bonus episode. Thank you all for listening and joining us for this very special conversation. It was phenomenal. If you like what you heard, as always, we encourage you to like and subscribe. We have 2 seasons worth of inspiring conversations for you to devour. Share with a friend and rate us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Of course, we're only taking the best ratings. Yeah. I'm just kidding. But Emmett, your thoughts? Oh my gosh. Today was
my gosh. Enlightening to say the least. I didn't want the conversation to end. I wanted to we're speechless. That's all I can say. We're just so lucky, Ginny, at the end of the day, to do what we get to do, sort of, and just talk to these amazing people. I'm going to go lay down. You can learn more about PeacePlayers and everything that we do on the Play It Forward podcast by visiting our website and following us on social media, mostly at PeacePlayers International. That's on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, MySpace, Bisco. No, those last 3, don't go to those ones. We don't have anything there. And don't forget to check out our new Instagram page with a lot of fresh behind the scenes content, stuff you might missed. of me and Chinny on our Play It Forward podcast. Chinny, I need a big glass of water, and I think I have to lay down for like a couple days.
Lay down.
There's so much.
Lay down.